So let's start with the senses. Let's say that I am looking at a star. Am I seeing the star as it really is right now? Our scientific story says no, right? I'm seeing it how? As it was a long time ago, because it takes a certain amount of time for the light to reach me. But look at what we just did with that simple little observation, if it's true. When I look at that table in front of me that the camera can't see, it's because supposedly the light rays bouncing off of it, coming to meet my eye, then it's got to be interpreted by my mind and all this, right? At any point, can I really know that the table is actually there? You're like, oh my goodness, Chris, are you being serious? I know, these things sound absurd, but let's be consistent. Let's start with the self. Let's start with our senses. And it's not just that table, it's that stool, it's that sweet and sour sauce, it's that napkin, it's my wife. See, people don't consistently live with these things, but look, seriously, if we're going to think in this way and that the senses are, you know, the end-all, be-all to try to answer the skeptic, like, we need to be consistent, we need to be honest with ourselves, and we need to distinguish between appearance and reality, which we do anyway. But I'm saying in terms of what the skeptic is saying, the skeptic would say, look, you don't know that anything is there. That's called the time-lapse argument that I just gave you. There's a certain amount of time that it takes for, you know, the light rays to reach your eyes from these things around you. But then they would say the other, you know, the contradictory accounts, like I talked about last week. Macbeth sees the dagger floating in front of him. He sees it, he reaches out to take it and knows that he's hallucinating, right? Is it a hallucination or a dream? English major? I think it's a hallucination. He reaches out to take it, and he's, oh, I'm just seeing it. But why should he trust his touch over his sight? When the senses contradict one another, why take one over the other? So there are all of these different problems. There was a philosopher named Skepticism Empiricus who wrote like a book of this stuff, just like, well, honey looks smooth to the touch, but it's sweet to the taste, and I don't know, all these weird things, right? I see a painting from far away, it's very small. Close up, it's very big. Is it big or is it small? But anyway, he's trying to reduce it to, all we can say is, look, it just appears that way. But this is only a step away from solipsism, right? From a view where the only thing that exists is what's in our mind. Does that make sense? I mean, and we put people like that in the mental institution, right? That's where this view leads, if you're consistent. And that's just a taste of it. I mean, there are piles of arguments in philosophy about these subjects. We'll look specifically at some of the bigger ones as we move on and how we can use those in our effort to defend our faith. But let's move over to reason now. Okay, no, let's stay with the senses for a moment, okay? They're always talking about evidence with the senses. I need something I can see, touch, taste, feel, hear. Okay, we hear this all the time with the new scientism, this worship of science, so-called science in our culture, in our society. Okay? We hear that all the time. Is that a basis for knowledge? Let's start with this, okay? It's wrong to believe anything without sufficient evidence. Well, first of all, we could ask about it being wrong, but we'll set that aside for now. And we could ask about what we mean by sufficient, but let's set that aside. Okay? You shouldn't believe anything without evidence. Okay, why do you believe that? What empirical evidence, what can you taste, see, smell, touch, feel that would support your statement that we shouldn't believe anything without evidence? And the answer is there is none. So that system doesn't stand up to its own standard. So it's not a foundation for knowledge, and it's not a broad enough foundation for knowledge, even if it didn't crumble that way. Now let's move on to reason. Let's do this with Descartes. But first, let's go here. Okay? Someone who would start with reason would answer the skeptic by saying, there are some things we just know. We know that something cannot be red and blue all over. It's self-evident. We know that 2 + 2 = 4. It's self-evident. We know these things. And so, skeptic, you are wrong. Let me give you some of the answers that the skeptic might give back. First of all, just because something's self-evident, does that mean that it's true? See, it doesn't really follow. And it depends on what we mean to begin with by self-evident. 2 people can believe differing things, and each of them say that what they believe is self-evident. A falsehood may be self-evident. It may be clear and distinctly known in the mind, so to speak, even though you can't know a falsehood. I'm using the word known in a loose sense. Okay, so there's one problem. Let's take the second problem. Even if we have these self-evident propositions, even if we can start with these things, okay? And by the way, this whole program was based much on Euclidean geometry, because Euclid had come up with all these things that we could just know, all right? These axioms that we could just know. Well, have you ever heard of non-Euclidean geometry now? Anyway, so the rationalists, the people who would use reason to stop this infinite regress, they start with reason. They start with these self-evident propositions. I've already given you one problem that the skeptics would bring up, but let's look at another problem. Even if we have these self-evident propositions, these things that are clear and distinct, okay, and even if they are true, and we can know that they're true, how do you know that you can reason out through them? Like, once you start reasoning from them, given that something's true, once you start reasoning out from it, you can make mistakes. You can be in error. And so you don't really have that much knowledge from that. Let's look at another problem. Okay? How far out can we expand this program anyway? Why is there any reason to think that we can have these self-evident propositions and then derive an entire structure of knowledge from them? It's another doubt that the skeptic would raise.